Dr. Amanda Sullivan had seen a lot of strange things in her career as Earth's leading xenobiologist, but nothing quite like this. The holographic message floating above her lab desk at 3 in the morning showed something that defied everything she thought she knew about alien life. "Computer, replay sequence Delta 7 again," she commanded, her voice steady despite the chill running down her spine. The recording flickered to life once more, showing the final moments of the Artaxian science vessel, Tomorrow's Dream. The crystalline structures that appeared in the footage weren't just beautiful. They were terrifying. The Artaxian captain's last words still echoed in her mind. "They don't just kill you. They feed on your fear. And they're coming your way." Sullivan leaned back in her chair, running her fingers through her disheveled brown hair. She'd been analyzing the message for 16 hours straight, since it had been picked up by the Deep Space Array. The more she studied it, the more fascinating and horrifying the data became. The Vorkath, as the Artaxians called them, were unlike any species ever encountered. Their crystalline bodies seemed to act as natural amplifiers for psychic energy, specifically the kind generated by terror. They didn't just hunt. They harvested entire civilizations by trapping them in living nightmares. "Dr. Sullivan," a voice called from the doorway. "There's something you need to see." Her assistant, Mike Torres, stood there with a tablet in his trembling hands. She'd never seen the usually unflappable graduate student look so shaken. "I was running those neural pattern comparisons you asked for," he said, walking over to her desk. "Between the Vorkath's fear frequency and various species brainwaves, I think I found something weird." Sullivan took the tablet, her eyes widening as she scrolled through the data. "This can't be right," she muttered, but the numbers didn't lie. "Run it again." 3 hours and 7 test runs later, the results were still the same. While most species' neural patterns made them perfect targets, for the Vorkath's fear manipulation, human brains were different. "It's like we're wired backwards," Torres said, staring at the final analysis. "Where other species experience paralyzing terror when exposed to their fear frequency, human brains show increased activity in the pleasure centers. Almost like we're getting high on it," Sullivan finished, a strange laugh escaping her lips. "All those horror movies, roller coasters, haunted houses, we've been training ourselves to enjoy fear for centuries." She stood up, her mind racing with the implications. Humanity, the species that turned terror into entertainment, might be the galaxy's only hope against these ancient horror-harvesting crystals. The emergency alert on her console started flashing before she could follow that thought further. Breaking news. Unknown entities detected in the Centauri system. Colonial forces reporting mass panic. Sullivan's heart raced as she opened the live feed. The crystalline forms matching the Artaxian footage were surrounding the closest human colony. "Get me General Morrison," she ordered the computer, already gathering her data. "And contact the United Earth Defense Force. Tell them." She paused, a grim smile forming on her face. "Tell them the game is about to begin." As the communication systems sprang to life, Sullivan couldn't help but appreciate the irony. Humanity had spent centuries scaring itself for fun, creating ever more elaborate ways to experience terror safely. Now, those same thrill-seeking tendencies might be the only thing standing between civilization and a force that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. The Vorkath were about to learn a crucial lesson. Never try to scare a species that pays good money to be frightened. "Dr. Sullivan," the computer announced, "General Morrison is on the line." She took a deep breath, straightened her lab coat, and accepted the call. It was time to tell Earth's military leadership that humanity's greatest weapon against the space terrors might just be their love of being scared. The warning shot had been fired. Now it was time for humanity to show the galaxy why they were the kings and queens of horror entertainment. Commander Jack Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Thunderchild, watching the crystalline forms through the main viewport. They were beautiful, in a terrifying sort of way, like ice sculptures made of nightmares. "Status report on the Centaurian colony," he commanded, his voice steady despite the grotesque scene before him. The Vorkath had already started their attack on New Alexandria, the largest human settlement in Alpha Centauri. Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez's fingers flew across her console. "Colonies reporting widespread panic among the non-human population, sir. The Andorians and Centaurians are. They're completely incapacitated. But our people—" She paused, double-checking the data. "Sir, the human colonists are acting strange." "Define strange, Lieutenant." "They're laughing, sir. Some are even recording the whole thing on their neural links." Morrison remembered Dr. Sullivan's briefing. The xenobiologist had tried to explain how human brains processed the Vorkath's terror wavelength differently, but seeing it in action was something else entirely. "All ships, battle formations," Morrison ordered through the fleet comm. "Remember your training. These things want to scare us. Let's show them what happens when you try to spook the species that invented horror movies." The first Vorkath attack came like a wave of living crystal, their forms shifting and sparkling as they released their fear-inducing energy. On every ship in the human fleet, sensors registered the psychic assault. And then something unprecedented happened. "Sir," Rodriguez called out, excitement in her voice. "Crew combat effectiveness is rising. Adrenaline levels are through the roof, but in a good way. It's like everyone just took the best energy drink of their lives." Morrison felt it too. Instead of the paralyzing terror that had devastated so many other species, he experienced a rush similar to the time he'd gone skydiving over the Martian canyons. His crew showed similar reactions: heightened focus, quickened reflexes, and an almost euphoric state of combat readiness. "All ships, weapons free," he commanded, a fierce grin spreading across his face. "Let's show these crystal nightmares what humanity does for fun." The battle that followed would later be described in the history books as the day horror met its match. Human ships dove through the Vorkath formations with reckless enthusiasm. Every time the aliens tried to amplify their terror effect, they only succeeded in making the human forces more effective. "Sir, we're getting a signal from Dr. Sullivan's lab ship," Rodriguez reported. "She says she's reading unprecedented levels of confusion in the Vorkath's crystalline matrix. They've never failed to induce fear before." "Put her through to the main screen," Morrison ordered. Dr. Sullivan's face appeared, her eyes bright with scientific excitement. "Commander, this is better than we could have hoped. The Vorkath aren't just failing to terrify us. They're actually helping us. Every time they try to scare us, they're essentially giving our people a combat stim." "Can we use this?" Morrison asked, even as his ships continued their assault on the increasingly disoriented alien forces. "Oh, we can do better than that," Sullivan replied. "I'm detecting signs of what I can only describe as confusion in their crystal matrix. I don't think they've ever encountered a species that enjoys being scared. It's disrupting their entire hunting pattern." As if to prove her point, the Vorkath forces suddenly began to retreat, their perfect crystalline formations breaking apart in disarray. The mighty space terrors, for the first time in their ancient history, were running away. "Should we pursue?" Rodriguez asked. Morrison watched the aliens flee, considering their next move. "No. Let them go. Let them tell the others what happened here. Let the whole galaxy know that when the Vorkath tried to feed on humanity's fear, they found out we'd already turned terror into our favorite form of entertainment." As the crystal ships disappeared into the darkness of space, Morrison couldn't help but laugh. Humanity had just won its first battle against the galaxy's greatest nightmare by simply being themselves, a species so weird they'd turned fear into fun. The Vorkath would be back, he knew. But next time, humanity would be even more ready. After all, they'd had their first taste of the ultimate thrill ride. And like any good horror fans, they were already eager for the sequel. Kevin, Night Stalker Thompson, stared at the military officials assembled in the Pentagon's briefing room, his gaming headset still hanging around his neck. "Let me get this straight," he said, running a hand through his neon blue hair. "You want me to help fight actual alien space monsters?" Dr. Sullivan nodded, her holographic presentation showing footage of the recent Vorkath battle. "You're not just any gamer, Mr. Thompson. You're the world champion of cosmic horrors and hold 17 world records in horror game speedruns. Your brain has been conditioned to process terror in a way that makes you perfect for this mission." General Morrison watched the exchange with barely concealed skepticism. When Sullivan had proposed recruiting professional gamers for Operation Player One, he'd nearly laughed her out of the room. Now, looking at the brain scans she provided, he wasn't laughing anymore. "Show him the simulation," Sullivan suggested. The room's holographic system activated, surrounding them with a perfect recreation of the Vorkath attack pattern from New Alexandria. Most military personnel had found the display unsettling, but Thompson's eyes lit up with recognition. "Holy crap," he breathed, standing up to walk through the hologram. "These movement patterns, they're just like the Level 3 boss in Nebula Nightmares. Look at the crystal formation shifts, the energy wave timing." He turned to Sullivan, excitement written across his face. "They're running on patterns, just like Game Eye." Sullivan smiled. "Exactly. And who better to exploit predictable patterns than someone who makes a living finding ways to beat supposedly unbeatable games?" Thompson was already pulling up data on his neural link. "We're gonna need a team. Maya Dith Queen Patul. She's the best at reading enemy attack patterns. Carlos Speed Demon Ramirez for strategy development. And definitely Sarah Ghost Runner Wilson. Nobody's better at finding exploitable weaknesses in horror games." General Morrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Thompson, this isn't a game. The Vorkath have destroyed entire civilizations." "With all due respect, General," Thompson replied, his expression suddenly serious. "Games are exactly what this is. The Vorkath are running on programming. Ancient and alien, sure, but still programming. They have patterns, cooldowns, and behavioral loops, just like every boss battle I've ever mastered." The room's screens filled with combat footage as Thompson began breaking down the Vorkath's tactics. "See this crystal formation? It's their equivalent of a power-up phase. And this terror wave? It has a 3-second charge time. That's your window to counter. They're not just monsters. They're mechanics waiting to be exploited." Dr. Sullivan watched in amazement as Thompson deconstructed in minutes what had taken her team days to analyze. "This is why we need gamers," she told Morrison. "They don't just play games. They break them apart and master them. That's exactly what we need to do with the Vorkath." Thompson was already sending messages to his selected team members. "We're going to need a training program. Something that combines military protocol with raid boss strategies, and a way to translate gaming terms into military commands. Trust me, aggro management is going to be crucial against these things." Morrison looked at Sullivan, then back at Thompson. "You really think you can turn our forces into, what, professional alien hunters?" "Better," Thompson grinned. "We're going to turn them into speedrunners. The Vorkath have been running the same program for millennia. Time to show them what happens when someone finds an exploit in their game." As if on cue, the emergency alerts began blaring. More Vorkath ships had been detected entering the solar system. Thompson's eyes gleamed with the same look he got before a major tournament. "Well, General, ready to let us show you how gamers handle boss fights?" Morrison looked at Sullivan, who nodded confidently. "Operation Player One is a go," he announced. "God help us all." "God has nothing to do with it," Thompson said, cracking his knuckles. This is all about skill, strategy, and finding the perfect speedrun route through the galaxy's scariest game. The war against the Vorkath was about to enter a new phase. The space terrors had no idea they were about to face opponents who had made a career out of breaking games just like them. Their attack pattern is a simple 4-phase rotation, Maya Death Queen Paddle explained, her hands dancing through the holographic display. The assembled Space Force pilots watched as she manipulated the simulation of a Vorkath battle formation. Think of it like that old game Dark Souls. They telegraph every major attack. The training facility, dubbed the Arcade by Thompson's team, had been transformed into a hybrid of military command center and professional gaming arena. Combat pods lined the walls, each running advanced simulations based on real Vorkath encounters. Ma'am, a veteran pilot raised his hand. With all due respect, what does an ancient video game have to do with fighting these things? Everything. Carlos, Speed Demon Ramirez cut in, stepping forward. The Vorkath are running combat routines that haven't changed in thousands of years. They're like a game that never got patched. He pulled up footage from the new Alexandria battle. Watch this crystal formation. It's their version of a loading screen. Every time they shift forms, there's a 3-second window where they're vulnerable. Sarah Ghostrunner Wilson was already demonstrating the counter-maneuver in a combat pod. Her fighter weaved through the holographic Vorkath with surgical precision, exploiting each telegraphed attack. It's all about pattern recognition, she called out. They're not just predictable, they're farmable. Thompson watched from the back of the room, a satisfied smile on his face. In just 2 weeks, they'd transformed traditional space combat training into something revolutionary. The military's initial skepticism had given way to grudging respect as their success rates against simulated Vorkath attacks skyrocketed. Now watch this, Maya announced, initiating a new simulation. When they group up for their fear wave attack, they create what we call a crit spot. Traditional military doctrine says to fall back, but that's exactly when we should strike. She demonstrated a complex maneuver that turned the Vorkath's own crystal formation into a weakness. Dr. Sullivan, observing from her research station, couldn't help but marvel at how the gamers had decoded the Vorkath's behavior. Their unconventional perspective had revealed patterns that her scientific analysis had missed. Time for some practical application, Thompson announced. Squad leaders, form your raid groups. Today, we're running the Jupiter defense scenario on hardcore mode. The pilots quickly organized into their new team structures, using gaming terms that had been integrated into official military protocol. Terms like tank, DPS, and crowd control had become standard combat terminology. As the simulation began, Thompson moved between the combat pods, offering advice. Remember, they're not random. They're programmed. Every move has a counter. Every attack has a cooldown. Master the pattern. Master the fight. The results were impressive. Pilots who had struggled against the Vorkath were now dancing through their formations, exploiting every weakness the gamers had identified. The terror wave attacks that had devastated other species became opportunities for counterstrikes. General Morrison is going to love these numbers, Sullivan said, reviewing the combat data. Combat effectiveness, up 300% across all squadrons. Thompson nodded, but his attention was on a new alert flashing across the main screen. We're about to get some real-world testing. Long-range sensors just picked up a Vorkath fleet heading toward Mars colony. The room fell silent. This would be the first real test of their new training methods. Well, Thompson announced, his voice carrying across the facility. Looks like we're about to take this game into ranked competition. Show me what you've learned, people. Time to find out if all those tutorial levels paid off. As the alert sirens began to wail, the pilots rushed to their ships with an enthusiasm that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were players in the ultimate horror game, and they had all the cheat codes. The Vorkath were about to learn that when you fight humans, every battle is a speed run waiting to happen. Raid Group Alpha, hold aggro on the left flank. Beta Squad, I need crowd control on those crystal formations. Thompson's voice crackled through the command channel as the battle for Luna Base Prime reached its peak. The void around Earth's moon had become a symphony of laser fire and crystalline screams. The largest Vorkath fleet ever recorded had emerged from hyperspace just hours earlier, their massive forms casting prismatic shadows across the lunar surface. But instead of terror, the human forces had greeted them with an almost festival-like atmosphere. Boss phase change. Maya called out from her tactical station. They're shifting into the diamond formation, just like we practiced, people. The space around Luna Base had been divided into what the gamers called arena zones, each managed by different raid groups. As the Vorkath attempted their standard terror wave attack, they found themselves being herded into carefully prepared kill boxes. Remember your parry timing. Sarah Ghost Runner Wilson instructed through the fleet comms. Her fighter squadron executed a perfect weaving pattern through the crystal formations, their movements looking more like a choreographed dance than traditional space combat. Their attack animation takes exactly 2.8 seconds. That's your window. General Morrison watched from the command center, his earlier skepticism long forgotten. The battle display looked more like one of Thompson's gaming tournaments than any military engagement he'd ever seen, but the results were undeniable. Sir, a communications officer called out, the Vorkath are attempting to adapt their pattern. They're trying something new. Thompson actually laughed. No, they're not. They're entering their desperation phase. It looks random, but it's just their hidden pattern loop. Carlos, show them what we found in the training sims. Carlos, Speed Demon, Ramirez's strike team, shot through the seemingly chaotic crystal formations with impossible precision. Just like speed-running Elden Ring, he announced. When the boss gets desperate, they always fall back on their base programming. The Vorkath's attempt at unpredictability became their undoing. Each random movement followed scripts that the gamers had already decoded during their training sessions. The ancient terror hunters had never faced an enemy that could read their code. Energy spike. Dr. Sullivan's voice cut through the chatter. They're charging for a mass terror pulse. It's bigger than anything we've recorded. Thompson's response was immediate. Perfect. Everyone, pop your power-ups now. That's right. Hit those adrenaline boosters the moment their wave hits. Let's show them what happens when you try to survival horror the horror fans. The Vorkath released their most powerful fear attack yet, a cascading wave of pure terror that would have reduced most species to gibbering wrecks. Instead, the human forces rode the wave like a psychological surfboard, their enhanced brain chemistry converting the fear into combat focus. All units, execute Speedrun Strat Alpha, Thompson commanded. They're locked in their ultimate attack animation. This is our perfect DPS window. What followed would later be described in military history books as the Luna Base Massacre, though the gamers simply called it a perfect run. Every weakness, every pattern, every predictable movement the Vorkath had developed over millennia was exploited with the precision of a world record speedrun. The crystalline entities began to retreat, their perfect formations shattered by an enemy that treated their terror weapons like power-ups. But this time, humanity didn't let them escape to regroup. Chase mechanics initiated, Maya announced with professional satisfaction. They're running exactly the escape route we predicted. Kill teams are in position for the final phase. Thompson stood in the command center, his gaming headset still firmly in place. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the fleet, congratulations on completing the first boss fight. But remember the old gaming rule. When you beat the boss too easily, It just means there's a harder form coming. As the last Vorkath ships fled or fell, humanity had proven something revolutionary. In the age-old battle between terror and technology, the real winners were the ones who had turned both into a game. Kevin Thompson stared at the captured Vorkath crystal fragment through the containment field, his expression one of growing excitement. "Dr. Sullivan, you need to see this. It's not just similar to old gaming hardware. It is hardware. Living, alien hardware." The research lab deep within Luna Base had been converted into what the team called their debug room. Fragments from the recent battle floated in various containment fields, each one pulsing with an inner light that seemed almost digital. "Look at the structure," Thompson continued, manipulating the holographic display. "These aren't random crystal formations. They're circuit patterns. The whole species is running on ancient code." Dr. Sullivan leaned in closer, her scientific curiosity piqued. That would explain their rigid behavior patterns. But how did an organic species evolve into living computer systems? "Maybe they didn't evolve," Maya suggested, looking up from her analysis station. "What if they were designed? The ultimate video game bosses, created by some ancient civilization that got more than they bargained for." The lab's main screen displayed detailed scans of the crystal structures, their internal patterns reminiscent of the circuit boards from Earth's early computing age. Carlos had been running pattern recognition software against historical technology databases all night. "Check this out," he said, pulling up a comparison display. "The way they process fear. It's like an old resource collection algorithm. They're not just feeding on terror, they're mining it like cryptocurrency." Thompson snapped his fingers. "That's why they can't adapt to us. They're running on legacy code that never expected to encounter a species that enjoys fear. We're like a bug that became a feature." Dr. Sullivan was already recording her observations. The crystalline structure must act as both hardware and software, allowing them to store and process the emotional energy they harvest. "But if they're running on code, then we can hack them," Sarah finished, a grin spreading across her face. "We don't just have to fight them, we can rewrite them." The lab erupted into activity as the team began working on what Thompson called the ultimate cheat code. Dr. Sullivan's scientific knowledge combined with the gamer's understanding of system exploitation created something revolutionary. "It's like finding an admin console in a game's code," Thompson explained to General Morrison during the emergency briefing. "The Vorkath have been running the same program for millions of years. Nobody ever thought to try changing their source code." The general looked skeptical. "You're telling me we can reprogram these things just like that?" "Not exactly," Dr. Sullivan interjected. "But we can broadcast a signal that disrupts their basic operating parameters. Think of it like forcing a system update they can't refuse." Maya pulled up the battle data from previous engagements. "Every time they try to process our fear response, they get error messages. We can amplify that, create a cascade failure in their ability to feed on terror." "We're about to change the meta," Thompson declared, using his favorite gaming term. "The Vorkath have been running this game on God mode for too long. Time to apply some balance patches." The lab's alert system interrupted their discussion, warning of multiple Vorkath fleets converging on the solar system. This time, it looked like they were bringing their entire species for the final battle. "Perfect timing," Thompson said, his eyes locked on the tactical display. "They're coming to us with their whole server population. One broadcast will reach them all." Dr. Sullivan looked at the device they'd created, a signal generator designed to interface with the Vorkath's crystalline nature. "This could do more than just disrupt them," she warned. "We might completely change their basic nature." "That's the point," Thompson replied. "Every great game needs a major update sometimes. The Vorkath have been the galaxy's raid bosses for too long. Time to turn them into regular players." As the alert sirens began to wail, the team made their final preparations. They were about to attempt the most ambitious hack in human history, rewriting the source code of an entire species. The question was, would the universe be ready for a version update of its most ancient terror? Initiate broadcast sequence, Thompson commanded from the bridge of the UES Thunderchild. The ship's new quantum transmitter hummed to life, ready to deliver their custom-coded signal to the approaching Vorkath Armada. Time to see if our patch works. The largest fleet humanity had ever assembled hung in space behind them, each ship equipped with Dr. Sullivan's signal amplifiers. The Vorkath had brought their entire species for this battle, exactly as the team had hoped. Multiple hostile signatures detected, Maya reported, her hands dancing across the tactical display. They're running their classic opening formation. But something's different. The patterns are more aggressive. They're running their code at higher clock speeds, Carlos observed, monitoring the energy readings, like when a boss fight gets more intense in its final form. The void between Mars and Jupiter had become a symphony of crystal refractions as thousands of Vorkath ships emerged from hyperspace. Their terror pulse was immediate and overwhelming. But the human fleet didn't just resist it. They were ready for it. Signal strength at maximum, Dr. Sullivan announced from her station. Broadcasting now. The effect was instantaneous. The pristine crystal formations of the Vorkath fleet began to shimmer and shake as the new code invaded their ancient systems. Their terror wave didn't just fail, it reversed, flooding back through their own ranks. Holy crap, Sarah whispered, watching the readings. They're experiencing fear. We actually made the space terrors afraid. Thompson's voice carried across all channels. All units, execute Speed Run Protocol Alpha. They're vulnerable. Time to show them every exploit we've learned. The human fleet moved like a well-oiled raiding party. Every squadron had their role. Every ship knew their part in the strategy. Months of gaming-inspired training had prepared them for this moment. Look at their formations, Maya called out. They're trying to reboot their systems, return to base programming. Classic boss move when the AI gets confused. But the Vorkath couldn't reset. The signal kept coming, forcing them to experience something they'd never known in their millions of years of existence. Uncertainty. Fear. The very emotions they used as weapons were now turning against them. Push forward, Thompson ordered. Don't let them reorganize. Treat this like a speed run. No breaks, no hesitation. The battle that followed would later be called the Great Rewriting. Human ships darted through the confused Vorkath formations, their weapons targeting specific crystal nodes that Carlos had identified as critical processing centers. Energy signatures are shifting, Dr. Sullivan reported, her voice tight with excitement. The code is propagating through their entire network. It's like their whole species is getting a forced system update. Some of the Vorkath ships began to power down, their crystal forms dulling as their ancient programming gave way to the new code. Others tried to flee, only to find human ships herding them back into the signal's range. They're sending out some kind of communication, Sarah announced. It's different from their usual patterns, almost like they're trying to talk instead of terror blast us. Thompson shared a look with Dr. Sullivan. This was the moment they'd hoped for, the possibility that the Vorkath could be more than just cosmic horror game bosses. Respond on their frequency, he ordered. Let's see if we can open a dialogue menu with these former raid bosses. As the signal continued its work, the great crystal fleet of the Vorkath, the terror of 1,000 species, hung suspended in space, their very nature being rewritten by a species that had turned their greatest weapon into entertainment. You know what this means, Thompson said to his team, a smile playing at his lips. We just set a new galaxy-wide speed run record for beating the ultimate boss, and instead of destroying them, we're about to unlock a whole new playable character. The age of the space terrors was ending, but something new, and potentially much more interesting, was about to begin. Welcome to the first annual Terran Vorkath Gaming Championship. Thompson's voice boomed through the massive arena that had once been Luna Base's main defense center. 6 months had passed since the Great Rewriting, and nobody could have predicted this outcome. The crystalline form of Apex Node 147, now known to human fans as Crystal Crusher, hovered before its gaming station, its features reshaped into something almost resembling a smile. The former Space Terror had become one of the most popular streamers in human space. Still hard to believe, Dr. Sullivan muttered, watching from the VIP box as human and Vorkath teams prepared for the tournament. We went from fighting them to teaching them how to play cosmic horrors online. The transformation of the Vorkath had been more successful than anyone could have imagined. Once their fear-feeding programming had been rewritten, their natural ability to process and amplify emotions had found a new purpose: entertainment. Red Team, consisting of 3 humans and 2 Vorkath, will face Blue Team in our championship match, Maya announced, now a famous esports commentator. This is the first time we're seeing cross-species cooperative play at this level. The arena's screens showed both teams' members. The Vorkath players had modified their crystal forms to display team colors, a new behavior that had emerged after their reprogramming. They discovered that creating entertainment was far more satisfying than harvesting fear. Your species has shown us a better way. Crystal Crusher's telepathic voice reached Thompson. We spent eons as the galaxy's nightmare. Now we help create dreams instead. The championship match began, and the audience watched in awe as human and Vorkath players demonstrated perfect teamwork. The crystalline beings' natural processing power made them exceptional at complex game mechanics, while human creativity and unpredictability provided the strategic edge. Look at that combo, Carlos shouted from the commentary booth. Crystal Crusher just used their Terror Pulse as a power-up for their human teammate. That's the kind of synergy we never could have imagined 6 months ago. In the stands, General Morrison sat with various alien diplomats, all watching in amazement. The Vorkath, once the most feared force in the galaxy, had become celebrity gamers and entertainment icons. Their crystal ships, previously weapons of terror, now served as living concert venues and gaming arenas. The final round is starting, Sarah announced, her voice carrying over the cheering crowd. Remember, the winning team gets to lead the first mixed-species expedition into the unknown regions. Dr. Sullivan smiled at that. The Vorkath's ancient star charts had opened up new possibilities for exploration. Their knowledge, once used to hunt prey, now served to guide joint human-Vorkath adventure teams into unexplored space. The match reached its climax with a spectacular display of teamwork. Human reflexes combined with Vorkath processing power created gaming plays that had never been seen before. The crowd, a mix of various species that had once fled from the Vorkath in terror, now cheered for their favorite crystal players. Game over. Red Team wins. Maya's voice rang out as the arena erupted in celebration. Crystal Crusher's form glowed with joy, an emotion the Vorkath had only recently learned to experience. Thompson stood to address the crowd. This is more than just a game championship. This is proof that even the galaxy's greatest terrors can change when they learn to play instead of prey. Next season, we're adding 4 more species to the league. Later, in the victory celebration, Dr. Sullivan found herself standing next to a junior Vorkath player, its crystal form shaped into what they now called their gaming configuration. Did you ever imagine, the young Vorkath asked, that teaching us to feel fear would lead to us learning how to have fun? Sullivan watched as human and Vorkath players celebrated together. Their former enmity transformed into the kind of friendly rivalry only gaming could create. That's the thing about humans, she replied. We've always known that the best way to beat your fears is to learn to play with them. As the arena pulsed with light and joy, the message was clear. In the great game of galactic civilization, sometimes the best victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's teaching them how to be a better player.